Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Is everybody able to hear me? This is my first stream producing by myself, so I want to make sure that I've got everything correct. If you wouldn't mind typing in chat if you're able to hear me. Also, I will be monitoring the chat and I will be able to answer your questions throughout. Um, but if I can't, yep. Okay, but yeah, my name is Sebastian Yūe. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the developmental editor for the Confluence RPG. And being a developmental editor means that I am responsible for the creation of the internal design guide, and it's my job to kind of go through everything with a fine-toothed comb and take a look at the mechanics. And it's my job to kind of um, to make comments and to um, like let everyone know that all of the language is consistent. So if, for example, like we have a facet called engineering, it's my job to be like, well, we called this an engineering role like a couple of sentences ago, and now we're calling it an engineering check. So it's kind of my job to make sure that everything is as clear and concise as possible. But before we get into all of that stuff, I do want to give a quick overview of the Confluence RPG, specifically what I'll be talking about today. So it's really interesting the way that this has been designed. We really want to emphasize character ability over core mechanics. And so you only use the core mechanic when you don't have a relevant character ability. And so the main character ability that we have is facets. And a facet basically represents your character's like ability based on their experience, based on where they've gone and trained, if they've gone and trained anywhere, where they have been raised, or if they have certain areas of expertise. And so all of those have their own unique mechanics. And so I think like the portion of the internal design guide that I want to go through today is how to design a facet and how to make one of those abilities. And so like this internal design guide that I have up on the screen here, that is the document that I put together for the team. So internally, this is the document that we're using to train other people on how to write mechanics for this game. And before I go any further, I do want to clarify that I'm not actually the system designer. That is Sinta Posadas, Takuma Okada, and Viditya Voleti. They're all really brilliant. They came up with this system, they made these mechanics, and it was kind of my job to come in a bit after that, like go through them and distill that into a way that that we can teach others to design them. And this document is going to be the basis for an upcoming zine that we have for this game. It's essentially going to be our So You Want to Build It zine. And so if you're interested in designing third-party content for Confluence, it will be based on this document. But for now, this is what we're using internally. So as you can see, I have this internal design guide up. It has a little introduction. This is for like anyone if you're on the team who is designing this game. And so it has, like, hey, here is what this document does. Here is who to contact. You've got to contact me if you have questions about it. Um, and we do have a Confluence RPG style guide as well. So I was somewhat involved with that. It is The style guide is again about that consistency, but it's more if you're if you're an editor. But I do want to distinguish that the style guide is different to the design guide. So the style guide is more about the language that you would use, and whether or not you use a numeral or a number in certain cases. And the design guide is here is how to make mechanics for this game. Here's how to actually do the game design. And I find that not a lot of games have design guides necessarily. I've been on a few that have, and actually, my first exposure to design guides themselves was when I was working on Apocalypse Keys as a stretch goal writer. Raina Jadi put together a very thorough guide on how to do a playbook for that. And so that was in the back of my mind when I was putting this together. I wanted it to be really clear, step by step. Here is how to do this. But this, I've taken this out. This is the facets section. So, what is it? A facet is a unique set of mechanics that represents how a character interacts with the world. So, essentially, it gives a little rundown of what the mechanic is and when players will be exposed to them and what they're supposed to do. So, as I said, they reflect a character's training in a specialized area, background with a particular profession, or experience gained from living in a specific location in Ajuria. And Ajuria is the world in which Confluence is set. And it's a really important part of the system because this system was actually designed after the world was created. So it is designed to be played in this particular world. And so this design guide will walk you through how to make new facets. So Before I got into the mechanics itself, like how to do that, I wanted to put up some facet design principles. And so you've probably heard the terminology of like, principles and practices and philosophies and all of that, and it can sound very theoretical until you actually kind of sit down to write them. And so actually I learned a lot while I was putting this together. Um, but as I said, it's really grounded in the world in which we're playing. So I put, explain the world. So they're player facing mechanics. And so I wanted people to bear in mind like the tone that we're using for all the books. It needs a consistent voice. That's really important to us. So ultimately, a facet is a piece of technical writing that the players will interpret and explain to the table. So make them unambiguous and easy to understand. So yeah, like the mechanics have to be usable. The player has to be able to understand what they're supposed to do. So in that way, I wanted to frame it as like explain how to use this thing to interact with the universe. I also said, they need to show the world. Facets need to let their players have their characters, do things. So when you're creating it, think about how a player would describe the action and invent mechanics that simulate it. So it's like, when you're writing one of these, when you're designing one of these, it should make it easy for players to imagine what that action would look like. And I'll go into examples and stuff. Like this is like a 16-page document. It has a bunch of stuff in it. Um, and I also said, it has to explore the world. So some of them explore the characters, some of them, sorry, reward the characters for traveling, learning new skills and meeting new people. There are like the facets vary a lot. We have some combat focused ones, we have some social focused ones, and we have some that are just about gathering information. And that's actually a really cool way to do world building. So, it's a way to reward characters for traveling, thinking of ways to integrate exploration into the facet and encourage the character to actually travel around Ajuria because we want people to visit different places. There are some really cool locations in this universe. Honestly, my favorite is like there's the gravity isles, and that's where you can learn a specific kind of gravity magic facet, which I'll get to. I also said, they need to change the world in that when a character uses it, they have to move the story forward and influence the world around them, and design mechanics with outcomes that dramatically change the scene, no matter the result. So a lot of these do involve dice pools. So our core engine is a d6 dice pool, and so we have a basic roll, which is, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen. This isn't a super high stakes situation, but I think it would be fun to roll in this instance because we found that actually a lot of players just like rolling dice, and honestly myself included. Sometimes I'll be like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, I want to roll a die. So we wanted to let you do that in this game, and so that's our kind of quick roll. And we also have scene rolls, which are more involved for very dramatic situations. And those happen when you're in a really high stakes situation. You build a dice pool, the story leader, which is our GM, they also build a dice pool, and you roll these opposing dice pools. And the player's dice pool is you counter pool of the factors that are in your favor that are helping you with the action you want to do. And the story leader's dice pool is all of the actions or circumstances that are against you that are presenting obstacles to your action. And so you roll these two opposing dice pools, and the outcome will be influenced by that. And so again, like those actions, you'll only do those if you don't have an applicable facet or other ability from your character. But these were still the core kind of basis. And so if you do have a facet, like say you're an engineer and you have the engineering facet, instead of doing the scene roll, you might do an engineering roll if you're trying to do an engineering thing. But all of this to say that the mechanics are supposed to move the story forward and you know be a bit dramatic. So which I like. And also, we said build the world. Like, world building is a really important aspect of this game. So facets also do allow players to add details to the setting. So sometimes your facet might you might roll, and it might be a situation whereby it's like, okay, so you rolled really well. Tell me what in this scene is helping you do this, or like, oh, you rolled really badly. Like, what happens? You're probably familiar with that if you're playing a lot of tabletop games. But we wanted players to collaborate with each other and with the story leader to flesh out people, places, things, and the facets vary a lot in terms of complexity. So. So through the design, we wanted to offer new possibilities and ways to interpret like the world building across Egeria. But all of this kind of sounds, might sound a bit obvious, but it's nice to kind of have it laid out so that everyone knows. And this is a design guide for the whole team, not necessarily people who are just doing the mechanics. So you could be from like any other department, and you should be able to just pick up this document and start making this game essentially. And so I have this anatomy of a facet section, and it is a list of elements to include. Well, building a facet. This is essentially like a facet wireframe. So, and then after that, I have this big list of things, and then following that, I go and break down each one in each section. So I'm just gonna do that. So facets in detail. We start from the top, start with the name, and it's, even these small things, like it might seem really obvious, but when I was writing this design guide, I was thinking, what do we want the name to do? Like what is in this name? And so essentially, it actually has to convey what you need to be able to read this and immediately get a sense of what the ability does. And because we're going to have these facets in a book called the catalog, so the idea is you open it, you browse through it, you pick the ones you're interested in, you take a look. It's a big selection of character abilities essentially. So the name is supposed to tell you like what it does. And so we have one called the close combat facet. So when you read that, you know that it deals with melee engagement. So instantly, if I'm a player that wants to go off and fight people, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to actually take a closer look at that. And so I want it to be obvious from the name that people are either going to know, yes, this is for me, no, it's not. And that's a good thing. I don't want everything to appeal to everyone. I want people to find what they're looking for. So and in the intro, so once we've got their interest with the name, the idea is, you'll go on to read the introduction paragraph. So it would contain, so like the introduction is a bit of flavor text that will contextualize the facet in the world of Ajuria. So you can tell the reader like how the facet came to be, like in universe, if this ability has an origin, or if it's commonly practiced or taught places. Who tends to be good at it, or whether there is like other lore associated. Um, we wanted people to, like our team, to describe what the facet looks like in play. So, what an idea of the action is. If you describe it in action, then it would inspire the player when they're making or developing their character. And we do want players to read the introduction and think, okay, this looks fun. Like I like how this sounds. I'm actually interested enough to keep reading and take a look at the mechanics. And so the mechanics, they are very, very variable, as I said. So I've said, I've put unique mechanics in their section, and then they all have like their subsections. I've said, we encourage concise, evocative, and dare I say, elegant design. And you might have heard like the term elegant design thrown around a lot in the tabletop space. Elegant design to me is it doesn't have to be overly complicated, and just design that is streamlined, easy to use, and there is such a thing as a beautiful mechanic, and I would like for this to have as many of those as possible. And we also do know that facets deal with a variety of different abilities, and it makes sense to be flexible with how much space. So I didn't actually put a word count, whereas with the name and the introduction, I said the name should be 1 to 2 words ish, and the introduction should be 1 to 2 paragraphs at most. But the mechanics can be any length, and it's variable. But we do have templates and stuff that I will get to as well. Um, does this system have classes, or can you have any facet you want? I've got a question from chat. Good question. So the facets, in a way, are kind of classes, but you can have several of them because the facets are broken down into specialties. So, for instance, if I take the engineering facet that I've already said, then like that one has a variety of what kind of engineering are you good at? You can get really granular with it, and so then you can have I think up to 4 specialties per facet, and there are a number of facets that you can take. So in a way, yes, and in a way, no. It has classes in the sense that there are broad areas of skill that you can take, and there are specializations within those. But it's not classes in the sense that it's not really like a level up situation. You just kind of accumulate more abilities. So it does have its own. You can think of it like its own version of classes, but it's a bit more flexible in terms of story and where it comes from. So yeah, but with these unique mechanics, I wanted to say like what is the story of this facet. So I'm going to come back to the close combat facet in this example. Like, the story is you're facing an opponent and you're like up in each other's faces, like locked in battle. So the mechanics facilitate this kind of fast paced action sequence. And the story of the network facet is that you're well connected and you can always say, like, I know a guy, I know someone. So the mechanics for that provide rules for maintaining and accessing your network of contacts. And these mechanics should help tell the story and convey like a level of risk associated with the action. Um, we have usability as well. So, like, are these mechanics applicable to a wide range of situations? Because we really want everyone to be able to keep using these. These are your player abilities. You should get really excited about these and you should be constantly engaging with them. So, we have a botany facet, which is really, really fun. It interacts with the biodiversity of Ajuria and you can use it anywhere. So, whenever you're traveling, you can you can explore plants, you can catalog them, and you can learn their various properties, and the system rewards you for just like accumulating knowledge about these plants. And that's an information gathering facet with its and there are a few like that. The chronicling facet does a similar thing. It can be used every time you learn a new piece of information. So we want these to be relevant, and if we encourage the design team and the rest of the team to outline specific situations and narrative triggers when designing the specialties for them, which are the kind of subsections of the facet that I'll get into. And I also put vibe. I was like, vibe is really important actually. Do the mechanics match the vibe of the facet? So the companion facet, that is a friendly relationship oriented facet, and its unique mechanic asks you to create like a companion, like an animal companion. And that we also have an exosuit facet, and that one deals with complex technology, and it has a unique kind of power recharge mechanic. And that one is all about like strategic resource management, and it allows the player to kind of demonstrate their character's precision and skill with that aspect of management. So you can see that the facets are designed to do vastly different things depending on your playstyle. And so if you are someone who is like, oh, I'm really into resource management, I need to figure out when it's chill to kind of blow all my suit resources and overpower it, and when I actually need to step back and recharge it, like you should be able to do that. I also put, flexibility. Can you alter the rules in a fun and interesting way? And so when a player chooses a specialty within the facet, the specialty can build on the unique mechanics of the facet. So we have a Wayfinder one, and underneath that is the Expert Navigator specialty. And that allows the player to succeed with their subject matter expertise. And so like that is like you're an expert navigator, maybe you can always find your way, you'll never get lost, like the stuff like that. We have a performer facet, and that has a burning passion specialty, which it kind of lets you like kind of power through and negate a consequence that like maybe if you weren't as passionate, then you just have to endure it. So we're kind of building in all of these ways to like you establish this mechanic and then you kind of then you empower it a little bit. So when you're designing these mechanics, so when you're designing the facet itself, we want you to think of it in a holistic way that the facet and the specialty will work together. So after like while you're designing the facet, we want you to keep in mind like what kinds of specialties can you do with it, and how will you be able to change this mechanic through the specialties. So if you're designing them both kind of at the same time, it will feel cohesive and offer this natural path of progression that we want. I also put that we want drawbacks. So facets are supposed to expand the way that your character interacts with the world and showcase things that they're good at. But also, we want consequences, and they're designed to be narratively interesting. And so we want there to be consequences, but like not in a punitive way, and consequences that don't necessarily come about just by virtue of using the facet. But we always want the possibility for something to go wrong. So there's a divinity facet, and like in this game, you can play as like a fallen god, and with your divinity like diminished, or and you can try to accumulate it. It's a resource that's limited, and it represents your character becoming less divine or losing their godhood, and that could be like a really emotionally striking story to tell. And so the consequences for failing your role or expending your resources, that should happen, and that should tie in with your facet subject. And we have one called the Tensomancy facet, which I mentioned before. That's the really cool gravity magic one. So we were thinking, like, if you fail at that, what does that look like? It doesn't only mean that you fail to achieve your objective. It might cause, like, gravitational anomalies that when it goes wrong, and like, what consequences does that have for the rest of the universe? What consequences does that have for your character? Um, so we want those to be interesting and like really fun. Like there are a lot of situations where I'm playing a character and I'm like, actually, I think it would be more fun if I were to fail this role. Like it'd be fun. Yeah, so when we're going into the unique mechanics, we wanted the players to go in reading them and say, like, and kind of come out saying, I actually understand how this works and I can see myself using it. I can imagine situations where it would be fun for me to use this. And so, as I said, like the mechanics vary wildly, but I did go through all of them, and I found that certain structures and mechanics like appear in multiple ones. Like I did, like for instance, the chronicling facets, like the chronicling facet and the botany facet, they're both information gathering, and I've included that here as well. Essentially, like there are skeletons that are recognizable within the facets, and so I kind of divided them up into these very broad categories, just to help people and give them templates. So some of them involve creating focuses, which are those are just important story and world elements. They're currently being a little bit redone from the playtest because we got some feedback about that, and it's those are coming through and they'll be really exciting. But they're specific places, organizations, phenomena, events, and goals and stuff. So they're the parts of the story that are currently in focus. And so it's a thing that you'll write that on your kind of your character sheet and you'll keep an eye on it, and they're supposed to evolve with you and evolve with your character. And so including one of those, it indicates that like it's a kind of long-term investment really. And I've got some examples up here, like there's a companion and the jelly blood one. And I've linked this because we do have like other documents that that are supporting this one, and they're all kind of talking to each other. It's a bit of like behind the scenes stuff. And in the final zine for this, there will be more fleshed out examples. And but but essentially, like facets that ask you to create a focus um, will be, will be it's just to show the player that like actually you need to like this is going to be a very involved part of your character's journey, and you'll put that on your sheet and you'll be keeping track of it. And so I've written here like how to create a focus. Like here is how to word it, here is how to do it. So we write, create a focus for this thing or create a thing focus. And so information on how to specifically create that, like there is information in the player guide and the calibration books. So the books are designed to talk to each other, and so we're trying to avoid repeating information places. But you don't necessarily have to explain the process of creating a focus every single time when you put one in a facet. But if there are specific elements, like we really want to focus on specificity here. So if there's something that it needs for this particular one, then you've got to write it out here. There's no necessarily set way to do this, but it needs to be clear. So like the companion focus that has a list of bullet points of items to include, and the Jellyblood's symbiote focus, it gives examples of possible traits and focuses to inspire the player. So it's how to convey that. You need to write a focus for this. So that is how you would do it if your facet involves creating a focus. And some of them use meters. These are akin to clocks. These are honestly one of my favorite mechanics. So a meter is a way to track a quantity of resources or represent endurance, and so they're pretty versatile. You tick them; they can represent an accumulation of power, or it can represent like an increasing strain. So, and here I've put like here is when you should consider using a meter mechanic if you want to. If you want to maybe track progress towards a reward, and then when the meter is full, you gain access to a benefit. You might use it when you want to measure endurance. So when the meter is empty, you're defeated, perhaps. If you want to use it to track a quantity of resources, then the number of ticks in the meter represents the number of resources you have. Or it can be a situation where you want the character to be able to push themselves beyond their normal limits. So when the meter is full, you can overclock it for great power at a cost. So this one has a lot more because this one is about measurement essentially. So here, and I presented like different ideas um, as to how to like what things you can measure that would be fun in the story. And I also, under meters, I've also got you, when you tell a player to create a meter, the description of the meter should include, the meter also needs a name for the chroma facet. Like chroma is really fun because, your character, like some of the characters can like consume color as like a means of nutrition, and different colors will grant different benefits and have different powers and associations. So if you take that and you decide that, you want your character to eat color, then you can. So, something simple like color meter just to track like, you know, that is the amount of color that you have. So, and so like along with the name, you have to tell people what the meter represents. So for chroma, it is the amount of color that you have stored in your body. And for tensomancy, it represents the mental and physical strain that you have to endure to maintain the effects of your gravity magic. You also need to tell them that, the number of ticks that it can accommodate, the number of ticks it starts with, if any, when to tick the meter, when to erase ticks from the meter, and then what happens when the meter is full, what happens when the meter is empty, and then what you can use them for situationally. So, like, this is just an outline of all of the information that needs to be in this mechanic when you create it. And so from here, you can see that you can build it out and you can apply it. Like, if you want a meter mechanic, this is how you make it. And so the number of, like the nature kind of varies wildly depending on what you've decided that it presents, but all of it is super vital. These are ways for the player to interact with the meter. And so I do have a note on clocks. So they're uncommon in the Confluence RPG. They so far appear only once in the forged documents specialty. So the clock for that represents like a countdown towards an event and tells the player that they can only get away with so much before they face consequences. And so we generally recommend using a meter when it makes sense to add and remove ticks flexibly, and to use a clock when you want to count down to like an event or track progress towards a goal. This was like a whole discussion about meters versus clocks. What is functionally the difference? And so we figured out that clock is more of like a kind of countdown situation, and that a meter is more of a add and remove like situation. So that was an interesting discussion to have. And I think I did mention that some of them involve dice rolls. So we have examples of that being the engineering facet and the grotto facet. So we use dice rolls to resolve situations that are uncertain. And so including a dice roll as a unique mechanic tells the player that there is an element of chance and that they have limited control over the outcome. And so we commonly use dice to represent risk and determine outcomes based on the extent to which you succeed. So you might want to use a dice roll mechanic in a facet if you want to give players the opportunity to influence the situation without guaranteeing anything, or if you want to represent the risk of failure, or if you want to offer the possibility of dramatically different outcomes on a scale. So, like a lot of this, putting together this guide was like, what do we do? What is the dice roll representing in the fiction? Like, what kind of, you know, what stakes, what story are we telling when we roll this dice? Um, and so when you tell a player that a facet involves a dice roll, here is the description. Here's all the things that you need to put in this mechanic. So the dice roll also needs a name. Engineering role has a name. Sometimes the dice have a name. Like, these are your engineering dice. These are your grotesque dice. Here is how to build the dice pool. Like, so how many do you start with? What are the things that cause you to add to the dice pool, and what are the things that cause you to remove dice from the pool? So, going back to our core mechanic that we discussed a little bit earlier, generally, like for the core mechanic, it is, the things in your favor versus the things not in your favor. But depending on the nature of the exact facet, like it might be other things. It might be, like if do you have sufficient tools to do this engineering role? Do you have, can you draw on your past knowledge, like that kind of thing? So, we got to tell players how to build the dice pool, and it also has to have results and outcomes. And so I do have some examples of how to style the dice results. So for the engineering facet, um, it is if you are trying to improve a gadget. So we have like a list of improvements that you can make to it. And so we have the structure for this one is 6, 4 to 5, and 1 to 3. So 6 being the best result, you can choose 2 improvements, and 4 to 5, you can choose an improvement, you gain a setback. We also have a list of setbacks. Some of them kind of limit the functionality of your device. Some of them mean that, like, yeah, it works, it's temporary, you're going to have to fix it later. It depends. So, and the 1 to 3 is gain 2 setbacks. So, there is a chance of this going horribly wrong, like, and it can be fun. But depending on how you built your dice pool, then the chances of rolling any of these numbers will be different. And so to raise the stakes, there's also the option to introduce special outcomes and a result of 6 or 1. And so the breakdown for that would be like 6, then 4 to 5, and 2 to 3, and then 1. And this is an example from the grotesque facet. Honestly, I really love this facet because there is this kind of like surreal, kind of otherworldly, supernatural magic, like grotesque in like the literary sense of kind of reality warping. It's super weird, like but basically you can make this grotesque roll, and on a 6 it works perfectly. You can clear a wound, which is like a kind of hit point injury system related to using grotesque. But another player can add a detail that feels off even if it looks totally correct. It's like this reality warping uncanny magic. And so you can succeed here, but then another player gets to add another detail that is really that's kind of weird. Like, what about this is kind of unsettling? And if you roll a 4 to 5, it works, but there's dissonance between your vision and the reality that took effort to overcome. And then you can take a wound for it. You can, take damage essentially from using this ability. So, like, you still, it works, but also there's a consequence because this is it's really weird, like reality warping magic. And so we wanted to convey that that's kind of what happens when you use this really weird, this weird shit essentially. On a 2 to 3, it still works, but it feels like the nothing is leaking through. That is like the nothing is kind of it's an entity that you heavily interact with when you use the grotesque facet. So you add strange to the palette if there is not if it's already there. Give a nearby focus or an NPC a wound related to the nothing. Um, yeah, the nothing, like this kind of entity, this supernatural kind of behind the mirror situation. And strange to the palette, the palette is a like when you have a game, it kind of you can establish a palette full of like essentially keywords that you would use to kind of guide your play, like things that will come up, like themes that you'll explore. And so this one adds strange, and so it adds that into an element that will just kind of that is supposed to permeate the game as a result from using this reality strange magic. And then on a 1, the nothing runs rampant. Your original vision has been hijacked and warped. So add strange to the palette, you take a wound, and you change or add an area trait. So if you're, when you're in a location, like again, exploration is really important in this game. Then like this has a wider reaching consequence. It's not only just a theme of the game, but it changes the area. So all of the areas have traits. You need to reflect that the area becomes strange. So you have to, that kind of tells you that you need to add a concrete detail. So, like the idea for the grotesque is like, you have a vision and you kind of have to like manifest that into reality. So it's super, super fun. And I've said that here there's more information about how to write dice rolls in the Confluence style guide. And we've also said that when you create a facet that involves multiple rolls, be sure to keep the ranges the same by choosing one of those 2 dice result structures and sticking to it. So, um, so that means that like sometimes the facet itself might have a role, like the core for the engineering role is like the engineering role, and the like if you get a specialty that also is like, well, in this specific situation you can make this role, like we want to keep the structure the same so that it's easy for the players to navigate. That was a piece of feedback that we got in playtesting, so it's something we want to make sure to do. And so another mechanic for this is the record keepers mechanic. So I've put chronicling and healing. Chronicling is the information gathering one that we discussed earlier, the kind of historical records situation. And if you want to be a healer, you can actually like this is really it's kind of funny. You can be like a doctor with like a kind of patient practice. Essentially, you can get to know the other characters and the NPCs, and you can like your healing improves as you improve your relationship with them. And so you essentially have your little kind of doctor book, and it's kind of cute, really. But essentially, there are some facets that revolve around the mechanic of noting information, like throughout the game. So expanding your knowledge, giving you opportunities to apply it, And so if you want, like, if a player wants to play a record keeper, essentially, like, it shows that they want to use what they've discovered. They're interested in the lore of the universe, and they're interested in exploring and finding out more. So, like, they want to use what they've discovered in previous sessions, and so it's good for characters that are like, I really want to lean into the idea of being a researcher. Like, what can we do with that? So, you might want to use a mechanic if you want to maximize the ephemera from the atlas. So, we have another book called the Atlas. It's essentially our setting guide. We have ephemera, which means, like, there are little, like, in-universe posters, in-universe like newspaper articles and stuff like that. It's like little kind of like things that are like, ticket stubs from games and stuff. Like, so we've included all of this stuff to kind of really make it immersive. And honestly, I'm a big fan. You can see some of the ephemera that we have that are on this overlay. The art for the overlay was done by Shan Bennion, which honestly, they are a fantastic artist. And like this bright color palette that we have is consistent across the whole game. But yeah, like the kind of posters and stickers and things that you can see on the overlay, like that is this kind of thing that will be in the atlas. So we wanted it to be used as handouts and represent your discovery of information. And so, like, I really like the idea of, if you're the story leader, you can kind of you can like hand one of these items to the player and be like, here, you come across this poster, here you go. Like that, there's fun. But yeah, if you want to use the record keeper mechanic, that's a really good opportunity to make it interact with the ephemera from our setting guide. If you want to record clues for an investigation or mystery story, um, some of them allow the player to create their own piece of ephemera, like paraphernalia. Like that's some players are really into that. Like I'm a player that's into that. Like my background is in journalism. I like to write kind of fictional newspaper articles, and so honestly, this is a kind of facet that I might take. And we do want to reward players for engaging with setting and lore details. So when you tell a player that they have this record keeper mechanic, so this is the description that you need to include. You need to have the name and nature of the record keeper. So the chronicler gets a chronicler book, and the healer gets a patient log. And it might also interact with the focus mechanic. So you might need to create a focus for the book. So I have a little link to the focus section here. And when can you add information to it, like how to add information to it, and how you can use the information stored into it, and also the consequences of losing the record keeper. It's like if you lose like your book that you keep all of your information in it, then like what happens. Like there are definitely consequences for that, so you've got to keep it safe. And how to replace a lost record keeper. So like again, like this information is like you've kind of got to sit down and think like, what am I doing with this facet in action, and what are the potential things that can go wrong, what are the potential things that this is designed to do, and what are the potential directions that this story can go in, and here is how to write the mechanics in such a way that it facilitates that. So so like, so I've tried to keep this like, here is when you would use it, and here is how to tell people to use it. Some of them have facet currencies. Some of the facets have currencies. So there's a reputation one that I particularly like. And then you get like kind of reputation tokens. And there is also like a conversationalist one. So like those are like, we're getting into kind of social mechanics here. And essentially, a facet currency, it's like a special resource that you can access through your facet. So each one has a rule about how that currency is generated and how it can be spent. So essentially, it's a kind of fluctuating renewable benefit that you have. Like, and so what it represents is again unique to each facet. And so a player who chooses the conversationalist one, like they can define what their social dice represent on like a case by case basis. And the reputation ones, like those have tokens, and so they represent the kind of favors that you can give and receive. So they create this kind of this this system of, well, I'm keeping track of like, well, my reputation, it really matters to me. I have to follow through on this promise that I made because my reputation is at stake, kind of situation. um, and so, again, you need to tell players when they have access to the facet currency. Like they need a name, so social dice, reputation tokens, what it represents, and how to earn the facet currency, how to expend it, and how to renew it. So, like, I need to know like how, like, what situations, what actions will I get reputation tokens for doing, and like what can I spend them on, and how I can get more of them, essentially. And I've put earning and renewing as slightly different. Like, you might be able to earn it and you might be able to renew it, like with a certain person. Like, it might be more of a renewal, but essentially, like, how do I get this and how do I keep getting it? I also have a something else section because this is a non-exhaustive list of mechanics. These are just like the ones that I know, like the ones that had a similar kind of skeleton to them. And you're welcome to a new spin. We've said like you can invent your own thing. We do encourage like innovative work and exciting work that challenges game design conventions. So like we want to see like new ideas. And honestly, if you have an idea for a mechanic that actually is not in this guide, then honestly please do that. And I actually want for if someone on the team does come up with something that's super weird and super out there, then I want them to tell me about it so I can put it in here. um, I have also said that like you can include an example of play. So you can choose to write an example of play to demonstrate how using the facet would look in a game. So the goal for that is to show a player how they would introduce the facet and, remove any confusion. Like examples of play I find can be really useful because like if you read that and then it's kind of step by step, here is how it looks at the table, here is how it looks for the players to be discussing it, and here is how it looks for the players to be describing how their characters are using it essentially. So you can see, and then when you're kind of thinking through that process, anything you notice that's like, wait, I actually don't know how that situation would resolve, that kind of tells you that you need to go back a couple of steps and maybe rework what you have already. So especially it might warrant an example of play if it's complicated, or if it involves active participation from another player, because some of them do. And so I've put guidelines for how to write an example of play. So you focus on the mechanical details of the facet and avoid illustrating mechanics other than the facet. So you can include details of each step of the process, but keep it short. And so I've quoted a section from the close combat facet, which, you've drawn the ire of Captain Delabeltran and you have nowhere left to run. You draw your sword. You decide to play it safe and roll your attack with movement, since getting hit by any of his attacks is probably bad news. You describe your footwork, your desperate lunge to get into range, trying to dodge his wild swings. They swing at you. You roll a d12 to attack with movement and a d8 to defend from their swing. The story leader rolls a d12 for his swing and a d10 to defend from your movement. You unfortunately roll a 4 for your attack, while the captain rolls a 6 to defend. Their attack is a 7, and your defense is also a 6. Your lunge misses as he sidesteps and he cuts you on your outstretched arm. So, so for the close combat facet, there is a full example of that I'll get to. And but essentially, like, this is kind of an example of play that you might want to do. Some of them involve a more scripted format, so like you'll get exact like kind of line by line dialogue from the kind of players that we have and from the characters that they're playing. But for this one, we wanted to kind of demonstrate, here is how, like, here is what these dice, like rolling these dice, represent, and here is how you might want to convey the movements of your character and their opponent in the fiction. And yeah, yeah, Morgan in chat asked a really good question about classes. So here we have specialties. So each facet comes with a list of specialties, and so it's like a refinement of the facet that gives you a more specific way to interact with the story and its mechanics and the universe itself. So they are supposed to add new ways to use the facet, and they often build on the facet's unique mechanics. And so here we have this kind of a similar structure. So like all of the specialties need a name, 1, 2 words, short, evocative, tells the player what they're getting. Location tag. So some of them have location tags that indicates that the specialty is most commonly found in that particular location. And so a character might visit a place to learn the specialty, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it can only be learned there. It's just that if it's commonly practiced, then that is where you would put it. And so the location tag will appear in square brackets after the specialty's name. And some of them have prerequisites, which means that if you need to meet a certain requirement to take a specialty, it's noted. You might impose a prerequisite if the specialty is designed to interact with a specific mechanic from another facet or specialty, and that it wouldn't make sense without it. And you can also impose them for compelling narrative reasons. And the specialties are designed to be pretty quick, like flavor sentence, 1 sentence, short narrative phrase that explains how, like maybe you've trained to use massive weapons meant for foes much bigger than yourself, if you have like a really big weapon specialty. And a mechanical description, again, these are supposed to be pretty short, like as kind of subsets of the facet. This is how they work in play. So we do have a link to the player guide about like how the mechanics work. And I've also got down here like an annotated facet, which is the close combat one. So here, this is like the full text of the facet. And I've kind of flagged in purple here, um, like what part I was referring to. So like this is a kind of in the Z, and I want this to be a kind of diagram with like a little line pointing to it, and like so we'll have the text as like an image essentially, and it'll be like labeled. But essentially, like, so close combat, that's the name of the facet. The introduction is, violence has a strange place in Egeria. In some places, like the Motley Coast, many people have come together to face the world's chaotic nature, figuring out alternate ways to resolve their conflicts. But others come from eras with a history of violence, like the Walkers in Shadow. Some are carrying on their traditional martial arts, like the Jernag Flotilla. Some people are just scared and determined to fight off the unknown. And so in this universe, there are different eras, and so like the name Confluence comes from like people coming together from different places, different times and spaces, and like it's a very vast universe, and the idea is you can kind of you can come from anywhere, you can be anything. It's pretty cool. But some of the but and then the eras are like kind of distinct historical times, and then all of them kind of get thrown together in a Juria, which is pretty cool. But essentially, like the introduction outlines, like, here is why you might have got this super violent facet. And the combat masteries for close combat, like that is the unique mechanic. It has 5 that you can choose from that you can use in a fight. So each one has like 2 parts, attack and defense. But you can strike, you can swing, you can feint, you can grapple, and you have your movement. So, like, it describes like what each of these does, like strike, faster and safer attacks that do less damage, swing, slower, more powerful attacks. So, and like reading through the descriptions of these, you can see that, like, benefit, drawback, why you'd want to choose one, why you'd want to choose another. A lot of it is about just these descriptions and kind of conveying to the player like why they may want to pick one over the other, kind of thing. And so when you take this facet, you assign dice slots to it. So you have 2d4s, 2d6s, 2d8s, 2d10s, and 2d12s. So, like, this is an example of where you can assign the dice. Like, this character has really good movement because they've put like d12s to both attack and defense here. They struggle with grappling, it looks like, because their attack for grapple is a d4, but their defense for grapple is a d6. So they can defend from strikes. Look, because they put a D10 there, but they don't really use them so much as an attack because they put a D4. And so this is where the customization comes in. You can this is a facet where you basically assign stats to different areas of combat, which honestly, if I want to play someone who is really good at fighting, then honestly, I'm going to get really excited about this. I'm going to figure out like what my character's good at, and I'm going to choose dice that reflect that. So, and then I have an in combat kind of resolution explanation. And here is how to use it. Like, choose what mastery you're attacking with. So if you want to do a strike, then you'll roll that die. Like, describe what you're trying to do. If you're using the same mastery as your opponent, roll your attack. If you're using different ones, then you roll both the attack and the defense for the category that your opponent is using, because the defense is how effective you are at like avoiding that particular thing. So like this the close combat is meant to simulate like a kind of one-on-one, like dual one-on-one kind of punch-up situation, depending on what's happening. But if you're using the same mastery, then if you roll higher, then you win. If there's a tie, then you can describe the clash and you have to re-roll like that. Because sometimes you do just occasionally, like, your swords clash and you do a struggle, and it can be a big dramatic moment for it. And if you're using different masteries, then a defense die kind of deflects the attack die if it's a tie or higher. And so um, yep, this appears again like a duel with the captain, like this example of play that I read out earlier. So in this context, it describes like what die you're rolling for each thing. And so once you've read the facet, like the example of the play actually does make sense here. So, and then like after that example, we have like the narrative outcome. Like, so whoever wins an attack will inflict a wound on the other character, and if both attacks succeed, then both characters take a wound. Like sometimes you both get stabbed. That's just kind of how it goes. And there's also interaction between facets. So if a character with close combat is targeted by marksmanship facet, that's our kind of ranged attack, like shooting ability facet, they can roll a feint or movement defense die for their target, essentially. And they'll have to re-roll each time their shooter reloads because the marksmanship facet has a reload mechanic that interacts with it. So we wanted to express how these different facets could interact with each other in such a time. And when you gain a new specialty for close combat, you can also switch up to 4 assigned dice. Like if you decide that actually, like my character decided to get good at this and has neglected training in another area, you can move the dice around, which is pretty good. Um, and then there are specialties associated with this one. There's adaptable. So you learn quickly, and that's just a flavor sentence. It doesn't have to be anything more than that necessarily. You take in what's useful and you reject what is not. Spend a lesson to swap the placement of 2 dice. So if you do that, um, if you gain a new special, yeah. So when you gain a new specialty for close combat, you can switch up to 4. But if you're adaptable, you can just do this at any time as long as you have a lesson. How many facets can a PC have? Question from chat. Thank you. To my knowledge, I want to say that it's 4. Um, but that number might change. It's currently 4, and then you can just kind of accumulate specialties. That won't necessarily be the final number, but that's kind of the number that we're working with at the moment. It might, depending on how the game goes, we may or may not like adjust that. But yeah, 4 to my knowledge. Yeah. Yeah, so adaptable, you can get that. It just lets you, it's flexibility essentially. You can swap the placement of 2 dice. If you want, so for duelist, you can take the specialty for that. It's when you fight another person with this facet one-on-one, you always know what masteries they have in their assigned dice slots. It's the idea that you can kind of read another character's body language because you spend a lot of time like in a duel with someone. And honestly, like that, like I have I have a background as a fencer. Like I understand that makes a lot of sense to me because honestly, when you fence someone, it's like it feels like a conversation. Like you're having conversation through your swords. It's like a weird kind of thing, but basically like you can kind of get a read on them based on their stance and you know their body language essentially. And so another one that you can get for this facet is another specialty that you can get for this facet is First Blood, and it has the tag Delrune, location tag. And so Delrune is like this. It's a city on the Motley Coast. It's run by Zel Beltran, who is the captain who was mentioned in the example earlier. He's like a kind of pirate king, mogul kind of guy, and like it's basically like pirates run that town essentially. So there are laws that govern this, like kind of pirate code situation. So like the sixth law of Delrune states that if matters come to a duel, whoever draws first blood wins. So if you take this, you've never lost. You have a weapon of choice. You can use this weapon to roll attack or defense with strike, and then you get a +1 to it because you're just really good at stabbing people because maybe you're from Delrune and you're just used to getting into fights with these pirates all the time and you've never lost. So that's pretty cool. There is also one specialty called the Gloved Hand, which prerequisite is you've learned from the Motley Crew City Guard. That is a prerequisite. So this because the City Guard practices a specific martial art that aims to stop an opponent with minimal injury. So they're kind of out there to like subdue you, but not necessarily to kill you. So they have kind of unarmed techniques, throws, binds, that kind of thing. So when you successfully attack or defend with grapple, that's like a specific grappling specialty, you can immobilize your opponent for several minutes. So that kind of tells you, like, if you've specialized and trained with these guards, then you can use this kind of more subduing ability. But yeah, that is essentially the guide to facets that I've put together. And like again, the idea is that you're supposed to be able to pick this up and just kind of get started, write a bunch of character abilities. And that it's been a really interesting process, and we're still building it out for like the other mechanics. I know that I mentioned several other mechanics that are in this system that are not facets, but all of them have a guide that is similar to this. So I know we're coming up on time here, but I've been answering questions from the chat, and I really appreciate you joining me for this. Um, hopefully you found it in like helpful. So if you did, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Gosh, I sound like a YouTube influencer or something. I'm not usually on the camera like this, but yeah, this game will be crowdfunding in October, so there are links in the description below if you want to check it out. We're currently sharing like tidbits of lore and information on Patreon and Ko-fi, so feel free to check those out as well, and you can follow us on Twitter. And the overlay itself was designed by the incredible Cris Viana. She's a graphic designer with Evil Hat, and she's worked on a whole bunch of really cool projects. We're very lucky to have her doing the layout, and she also is doing streams. So like this is part of a stream series that we're doing, and so this video will go into a playlist, and the playlist has stuff. So we currently have videos from Cris where she does a layout, like where she does layout live, and you can see exactly like what she is doing. Honestly, it's I don't know very much about layout. It's pretty much magic. And our project manager, Leia, is doing a series where they talk about how administration and project management works. So, like, they're in charge of all of the record keeping. They maintain the Google Drive, they maintain all of the documentation and keep us all on time. So, if you're interested in learning more about project management, check out that stream too. And follow us on socials, all of that good stuff. And honestly, thank you so much for tuning in. This was really fun. And I'll probably end up doing more streams. I'm probably going to do one on style guides as well, because ultimately this is an editing job. So, keep an eye on our socials for announcements of those. But yeah, thank you so, so much.